Hi there, it's Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. Before we kick into the card making, I just wanted to quickly show you how I store my Distress Oxide Reinkers. This is just a really nice display case off Aliexpress, and it makes everything super easy just to reach for the color that I need. Anyhow, into the card making, I have some pieces here of scrap kind of watercolor. Now, they're all different sizes. It doesn't matter what size they are. I just had a pile of pieces to use. And I'm just putting down a mixture of kind of 2 Distress Oxides at a time. Now, I don't know the colors that I'm using specifically. Sorry, I didn't stop to show the camera each time. But what I'm doing is I'm just kind of using the Reinkers. You could definitely use ink pads, and you could use any inks that you have. It doesn't have to be the Oxides. And my goal here is to just create a few sheets of kind of watercolored paper with those kind of mixture of colors on them. So I'm going to do some die cutting out of these. So you will see me kind of put the colors down, then mush the paper into them, and then often I will add a couple of sprays of water, and that kind of makes it spread out nicely. And then often I will dry it with my heat tool and then come back and dip them in the same color again, just to get a little bit of layered kind of texture with the colors. And this really was just about having fun. I mean, you could certainly do this with the whole rainbow of colors. You could choose a different color palette, pinks and yellows and oranges. But for this one, I pretty much stayed in the kind of greens to blues and a little bit of purples, I think. So lots of darks and lights of each of the colors, and that would create lots of contrast and some nice kind of color changes within the watercolor pieces. So now I have this square die here. It is a stitched square die set, and I think there's maybe 6 or so dies in the set. This is off Ali, but anything that you have would work. But I do need to make sure that all of my papers are really, really dry, because if you put them through your die cutting machine and try and cut with them, you run the risk of tearing your project rather than getting a nice clean cut. So here I'm always adding 2 of the squares together, and I'm pretty much doing the one beside them in the set. I'm not kind of jumping too many, and I'm going to make 2 piles up the top there. Now, in particular, when I'm looking at this in the video, I am a big fan of making the best use of our paper and kind of, making sure I can save as much for another project, etc. But I am really just die cutting straight into the middle of all these pieces, exactly kind of where the color suits me. So it may look like I'm just die cutting all over the place, but I'm choosing parts of the watercolor pieces that we have that I want on my projects. Now this next part is not as fiddly as it seems. All I'm doing is taking some of the squares, and I want them to kind of layer up and look like they're all interconnected. So what I will do is I will cut one of the squares, put it behind where I want it to go, and then re-tape it together behind that square. So you'll see that kind of one side of the square is over and one is under. So I really just cut them, put one side underneath, and then use a little bit of this really thin double-sided tape from Alina Crafts, and that's how I stick it back together. And I'm just kind of creating a little pattern that will take up enough of the front of my card. So there's no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing, and I'm kind of trying it out as I go, and you'll see me place some squares and then kind of change them, and I'm just having fun. Honestly, this card I didn't really have a plan. I just sort of thought that this sounded like a fun idea in my head, and maybe I haven't had a go, but I mean, maybe you could do a similar thing with hearts or other shapes. So yeah, anyway, have a go, and if you do have a go, I would love for you to join our Facebook group and post your pictures of your projects over there. That way it's a nice easy way that I get to see what you're creating, and I love seeing what you guys have made. So you can see here that I'm not too far from finished. I'm just trying it out to see where I kind of have gaps on the front of my card. And I am going to add in a couple of extra little pieces, so I know that I'm not done at the moment. And you can kind of see here why it was really important that I get a nice variation in color from all of those pieces that I cut out earlier. And from here, I decide that I'm going to pop this up. Now, this is Alina's foam tape. This is the really thin one. I think it's maybe 3 mil wide, but it cuts in half so beautifully. So what I want to do is I'm just going to go around the squares, and I'm going to do sort of a few squares that don't touch first, and that way if you take off both sides of the release paper, you don't even have to cut the foam tape. You can just angle it around all of those corners and it goes around perfectly without any hassle. That's as long as you take off both sides of the release paper. If you try and leave the backing on, it won't go around them quite so nicely. And then with the others, because they're all kind of interconnecting and running into each other, I just end up adding, bits and pieces there so that the whole thing is nicely popped up and supported. And to be honest, this is one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite foam tapes, is that I can cut it in half and I'm not sitting there kind of struggling away with it and it's not driving me mental. It cuts in half beautifully. So even the skinny one cuts in half really nicely. Of course, her wider one, she has 2 sizes at the moment available in her shop. So now I'm ready to put this down onto a card front. So this card front is 4 by 5 1/4 inches, so it's a little bit smaller than my card base, which is going to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I'm just putting it all down kind of right in the middle. I haven't decided which way up it's going to go at the moment, but I can change that as well. And then I'm going to take some of those pieces that's up in the top left-hand side, and I'm going to add a few more pieces onto my pattern here. So I did want to use a few of the solid squares, and again, there's no rhyme or reason. I really am just having a play with this card, and I kind of just, you see, I'll put things and I try them out and then I'll take them away. I just want to balance up the card and fill it up a little bit more because it looks a little bit empty to my eye. And again, this is definitely one of those cards that you could modify and change it up to kind of suit any occasion. It's a very simple design and yet it catches the eye, and you could put on whatever sentiment you wanted to, and even make a few of these and just not have a sentiment on for now and put one on when you need it. But anyhow, I am going to put a sentiment on this morning, but I am just going to keep it super simple with a happy birthday one, and on my favorite banner dies, I'm just going to stamp it at one end in some VersaFine Onyx Black. But before I attach the sentiment, I kind of want to figure out how everything goes, and I also want to make my colors pop a little bit more. So I figure by adding this tiny little black layer in here, it will really kind of bring out the blues and greens that are in our pattern. So I'm adding it on, and it is just a tiny border, like maybe less than 1/8 of an inch, and then it will go on my card base, which I said is a 110 pound Nina Solar White. It's a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch, and that looks really nice and clean and simple to me. I'm just going to put a little bit of foam tape where it needs to be. Remember that those main big squares are popped up, so when I'm holding it there, I'm kind of thinking in my head about where I need to add the foam tape so that it kind of keeps it all nice and even. And it's easier for me to add it onto the card than onto the back of the sentiment. And then I actually end up smudging it right here off camera, so you can see that I quickly grab it again and I re-stamp out another little happy birthday one on the same banner, and it's fine because I hadn't stuck it down yet, so it's all good. Anyhow, that is my clean and simple card for today. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know what you think of it in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, bye!